Buddhist and hypnotherapist? What?
Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Dupree, scouring the globe to bring you stories of courage, passion, and resilience. If I could sum up this podcast into one word, I would use empathy. Now let's get inspired.
Welcome to the Joyous Expansion Podcast. I am your host, once again, Brett Dupree. Today we talk to somebody who was an alcoholic and then became a Buddhist monk and then came back to the States and relapsed, but then discovered hypnosis and then changed his life, and now he's helping other people change them. That's the word I was looking for. But first, I must talk about what's going on in my life, because if I can't be vulnerable, how can I expect my guests to be vulnerable? It is 6/10/2020, and I feel like I have to say the date because the date's so important, because holy crap, is this year a year. Not only do we have a global pandemic, we have practically a revolution of some kind, that something might be happening here, and what it is isn't exactly clear. This could be one of the most significant times in the United States since the 60s, civil rights, or this could be another one of those times where people get up in arms about something, we demand change, we get a little bit, and then we're back in the same as we were 5 years from now. And this happens again. Either one can happen. I was watching the John Oliver show. He was talking about how in the 60s, or I've been reading about the riots in different black communities, and everyone's going to say there's a change, and then there isn't. But this might be the right combination. I mean, one thing about the civil rights movement they don't talk about was World War II was such a significant reason why it happened, but it still took 20 years later, but it also didn't have social media, so a lot of things are changing because of that. People saw the guy cry out for his mama, and people are seeing a lot of brutality from the police firsthand, from people on the ground. You could see it. This might sustain, or it might not. It's hard to tell. People are easily distracted. But I'm not going to talk about that right now, even though I'm doing better with it. Just a lot of processing my feelings and making sure that I feel them. I remember at the beginning of this global pandemic that some of my spiritual friends were like, I'm not going to be upset. There's nothing I'm afraid of, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to take this pandemic and push through it, and everything is going to be great. And I'm like, I do not trust you at all. Because if you don't process those negative feelings and feel what's going on, you're just spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing is when you take spirituality or personal development, at least this is how I see it, and you utilize that to not deal with your crap. This is the thing I find annoying about personal growth and spiritual development. Part of the reason why I find this annoying is I used to do it all the time. In fact, I believe I was doing it. I think I talked about this a little bit, but I think I was doing that when I lost my job and I was laid off a couple years ago, where I kind of spiritually bypassed that everything's going to be fine. And then I was going to use a law of attraction and all these things. And I didn't just sit down and feel, I didn't feel because it was too much. See, one thing I think a lot of spiritual growth people forget is the fact that fight is still part of flight or fight. It's a fear response. And it's just a big fear response. And a lot of people think that they're willing to fight this and go into not fear because they're fighting. But the reality is they're just fear-mongering like everyone else. Some people deal with scary things by not dealing with it. Other of them go the other ways and believe in dumb, stupid conspiracy theories. Just stupid. But that's a way for them to feel control in this controlless environment. And then there are the people who have spiritual egos. Basically, a spiritual ego is just like a regular ego, except it doesn't believe it's an ego. They believe they're talking the truth. They believe they're a step above everybody else. Pretty much, if you hear a spiritual person talk as if they know something that everyone doesn't, they're talking from ego. Period. All of them. It doesn't really matter what it is. Because there is one truth, and the one truth is this world is an illusion, and what illusion you choose to decide, what illusion you choose to focus on is the illusion that you focus on. And the idea that your illusion is better than someone else's illusion, especially if your illusion is you not dealing with your crap and looking at other people. And I know what you're thinking now, because I'm thinking in my head, aren't you doing the same thing with conspiracy theorist people or the people who I am talking about? And in a way, of course I am. I'm no better. I guess the only way that I can say I'm better is I recognize that I'm not, even though that's a paradox in a sense of like, but you say you're better, blah, 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 blah. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole of silliness. But I think that's the only thing I have up on somebody is I recognize that I'm also full of crap like everybody else. And we're all dealing with our crap. But you can see people talk about, that's where they have to use words like sheep. You don't call someone a sheep if you really believe in something. Especially, yeah, that also makes me think of, you call them a cult, you're pretty much doing the same thing, and you're right. See how this works? I love the book Spiritual Enlightenment. It is the darndest thing, because there's this process that I never went down where you write down it's called spiritual autolysis, where you sit down, you write down something that is true, and you cross it out and you write down something that is true. And then you question it, but you keep on doing it, because no matter what thought you have in your mind, it's not true. Everything is false. Everything is just a perception. And that's why people telling me something along the lines of, this might not be reality, but it's just how some people perceive it. Duh. Just your perception isn't better than my perception. And it doesn't matter. And I'm allowed to act any way I want. And you're allowed to act any way you want. And that's when we make decisions. Because the reality is you can never change anyone's minds. People can only change their own. And that's something to always recognize. So yeah, anytime you deal with a spiritual ego, know that they're still asleep, just like you are. They're not awakened to some truth. If they're awakened to some truth, they'd be laughing right now, no matter what the freak they're talking about. Because how do you deal with an illusion? But laugh. Because it's all fake. This is all an illusion. Everything. How is that for deep? Funny I talk that way, because today we're talking to a Buddhist monk. Or an ex-Buddhist monk. I didn't really get if he's still a Buddhist monk or not. Chris Lemig is an author, speaker, meditation teacher, and transpersonal hypnotherapist based in Seattle. After struggling many years with his personal demons of drug addiction and depression, he finally took his first steps on a genuine path to recovery. Since 2007, Chris has spent 3 years in India as an ordained Buddhist monk, where he studied Tibetan Buddhism, philosophy, and meditation. In 2013, he published his book, The Narrow Way, a memoir of coming out, getting clean, and finding Buddha. Still, things have not all been Zen-rainbows and meditative bliss, even with a strong program of recovery and spiritual practice. Chris experienced a short relapse of both addiction and mental health issues. Fortunately, with the help of many compassionate friends and healers, he was able to find his way back to wellness. In 2007, he moved to the Seattle area where he started his private practice of hypnosis, practice, True Nature Hypnotherapy. Now here is my interview with Chris Lemig. Hello, Chris, and welcome to my podcast.
Hi, Brett. How are you today?
I am doing peachy. So it says here that you are a hypnotherapist.
That's right. Yeah, transpersonal hypnotherapist.
Ooh. How'd you get started into that?
I came back from a long trip or stay in Asia. I was over there studying Tibetan Buddhism and meditation, and I spent some time as a Buddhist monk. And when I came back, I decided that I was going to be a regular lay person again and was looking for a new career. And I thought about being a therapist, but because I'm fairly lazy, I didn't want to spend 10 years in school and doing all that stuff. So I came upon hypnotherapy, and it seemed like a great fit. And I'm really glad I made that choice. It's been wonderful.
Wow. So you became a Buddhist monk. Who were you before that?
Before that, I was your just typical fun-loving, I guess you could say, bartender. I worked in the restaurant business. Worked in the restaurant business for about 20 years. And some of those years were really good because I was clean and sober. And some of those years were not so good because I was not clean and sober.
What were your drugs of choice?
Pretty much anything that was laid on the table. Anything that was put in front of me. It was a chaotic time.
What effect did doing all those drugs have on your life?
It was just complete chaos, to tell you the truth. It's very dark and difficult time. Certainly there were some good times, and I remember having some laughs and some fun. And I think most alcoholics and addicts can attest to that it was not like 100% bad. But for the most part, it was characterized by just a lot of pain and a lot of suffering, a lot of running away, a lot of not wanting to feel what I was feeling in the moment, a lot of confusion and not understanding why I was doing the things that I was doing, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. So a lot of negative emotions and a lot of just feeling caught and trapped in this cycle of using and shame and using again and shame. And it was awful.
Did anything about the way you grew up attributed to your drug habits?
Absolutely. There is a wonderful psychologist and motivational speaker from the 80s who was really popular. Probably, maybe you've heard of him, John Bradshaw. And he wrote a wonderful book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. And in the beginning of his book, he makes the unequivocal statement that all addicts and alcoholics are suffering from toxic shame, which is rooted in your childhood experience. So absolutely, the things that happened to me in childhood, coming from a very kind of disruptive background, my grandfather was an alcoholic and he was also a pedophile. There was a lot of abuse in our family. And so coming out of that sort of chaos and that hurt and that pain contributed greatly to my life choices that I was making to deal with all of that.
How would you explain your toxic shame?
I would explain it as a core misbelief in my value as a human being, just as I am. A core identity issue of thinking that somehow I am at my core broken and flawed and no good. And in thinking that, everything else in my life becomes colored by that. And by realizing and seeing the fallacy of that, everything has changed. Everything becomes different. But that's the fundamental thing about toxic shame, is that it goes so deep to just one's sense of who they are as a person, and that person is not worthy of happiness or love or just the right to be and exist.
I guess one of my questions is, what got you to the point of wanting to travel to India? How did that even get that idea to become a monk?
Right. That's a great question. I came upon a book on Buddhism just after I got clean and sober back in 2007. And I guess I was just looking for something. I was, coming out of the fog of booze and drugs and cigarette smoke and bars and all of that. I suddenly kind of looked around and said, well, what am I interested in, actually? What do I want to do with my new sort of clarity and my new freedom here? Very quickly, I decided, you know what? I want to check out Buddhism, and in particular, Tibetan Buddhism. So I picked up a book and just immediately was smitten. I was just like, oh, man, this is just amazing. So I read another book and another book and another book. Very quickly decided, you know what? I want to go to India, which is the birthplace of Buddhism, and I want to just go and check it out and do a little pilgrimage there and meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama if I could, and things like that. And so I made that my goal, and I spent a year saving up money and wound up taking 2 months off and going to India for the first time. And then from then on, I was just hooked. I came back and all I could think about was how I was going to get back. And so that's kind of how things snowballed. And eventually I wound up going back for several years and becoming a monk.
What's it like being a monk in India?
Well, a little bit strange. Strange in the sense that as a Westerner, as a Caucasian guy, you stick out like a sore thumb as a Westerner there to begin with. And then to put on the robes of a Tibetan Buddhist monk, you wind up looking very strange to people there, and they're very curious. And what are you doing? And why are you interested in this? Now, more and more people have done it over the years, so it's not totally uncommon, especially if you're in an area where there's a lot of practitioners. But yeah, it was very strange. People would stare at me a lot and come up to me and say like, "Hey, Guruji, what's your story? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you just back in America living in the dream?"
That is a good question. What exactly got you to want to be sober?
Desperation. I didn't know what else to do. I was in a place that was really, I had to make a choice. I wasn't feeling well physically and certainly not emotionally, and spiritually I was completely bankrupt. So I just was in a place in my life where I was like, I need to do something or else I'm going to die. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic there. I think a lot of addicts and alcoholics, we talk in very hyperbolic language, but it was true. I felt like I'd really come to the point where I needed to make a change, or else I wasn't going to be around for much longer. The drinking and the drugging, I couldn't do it. I couldn't get clean and sober on my own. And so I had to make that decision to say, you know what, I need help and I'm going to do something about this. And I didn't know what to do, and it was very scary, and it was basically like jumping off into an unknown abyss. But I did it, and I got the help that I needed.
That's really cool. So you get clean and sober, you go to India, become a monk, and you come back, and everything is perfect, right?
Yeah, something like that, except for the part where it wasn't. I came back, and I decided to what we call give back the vows. There was some uncertainty on my part on whether or not that was the right thing to do. There were some issues with the Buddhist group that I was practicing with, that I had decided that it wasn't healthy for me to be with them anymore. And that can be the topic of another show maybe. But I decided that I needed to go back to being a lay person. And as I did that, I think just a lot of stuff, unresolved issues came up from my past, things that I hadn't dealt with, either in therapy or just by digging deep. And a lot of it came down to just having not dealt with a lot of the abuse issues that I had experienced as a kid, things that I had even not thought about for many years or just not remembered. As a result of that, it kind of tipped the apple cart over. And I wound up having a drug relapse, actually. And it was really, really painful. It was a really agonizing period of about a year, kind of going back and forth and being very confused, because I was like, man, I was just a Buddhist monk a little while ago. Why am I still struggling with this stuff? And feeling very humbled by it. Then eventually getting myself back into a recovery program. So yeah, it was not perfect at all, I guess you could say. But in another way, I guess it's just my life. And so in a sense, it was perfect.
One of my favorite sayings I've heard is, if you think you're enlightened, spend a weekend with your parents.
Exactly.
Would you say it was putting yourself back into that old environment that kind of sparked all those poor behaviors?
I don't think so, because, I had been in touch with family, and it wasn't like I was completely removed from the world, but I think it was that sort of that shift from going back into lay life. I had really put all my eggs in one basket as far as being a monk went. It was a decision that I came to over about 7 years before I actually made that decision to do that. So it was something I thought about a lot, decided that this is what I want to do. And so when I had to make the decision of whether or not to continue on that path, it was really disruptive to my identity, to my sense of who I was. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? It really was a blow to my confidence, into my ego. And I think as a result, that's why a lot of just really deep issues about like, who am I? What am I doing in this world? What happened to me? Why do I still feel this sense of toxic shame, essentially? And I realized that even though I had been a monk and had been a Buddhist practitioner for about a decade at that point almost, I was still feeling these really deep, dark feelings of like worthlessness. I needed to go back and look at those things.
Is that when you discovered hypnotherapy?
Yes, around that time. And I started going back to therapy myself, and I wound up finding a wonderful outpatient treatment program that was just filled with just absolutely wonderful, loving people, and was able to get some wonderful counseling and support. And then I discovered EMDR and hypnotherapy and went through those processes myself, was able to have some really, really profound resolution with a lot of my issues of abuse, and really get to the core of like, why do I not think that I'm such a great person? And really was able to get in there and get some healing going. So, and it's an ongoing process. It's a process that continues for me. I use hypnosis for myself on an almost daily basis.
What benefits have you gotten from hypnosis?
It's a wonderful tool to be able to calm yourself to the point where you can put aside for a moment all of the chatter and all of the sort of the judgment and the criticism and the critical faculty, we call it, and to give that a little bit of a rest and be able to go into a part of yourself that is always centered and is always grounded and has a lot of deep wisdom about who you are, what your place is in the world, and where you've been and where you want to go. There's a lot of deep wisdom in ourselves that gets covered over by a lot of confusion, a lot of distraction. In the process of hypnosis and in the state of hypnotic trance, we're able to access that deeper wisdom within ourselves. So that's what I'm able to do with myself. And I go into these self-induced trance states, and I talk to what I call my inner guides. And this is just, a metaphorical language to talk about, to give voice and form to my own inner wisdom. And I'm able to then have conversations about, where am I right now? How am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What are the right courses of action for me? What are the possibilities for me? And so I'm able to just better handle real problems and issues and feelings and emotions that life has in store for me.
Got you wanting to help other people do the same?
That's really been part of my mission since I got clean and sober. I wrote a book in 2009 and it got published in 2013 called The Narrow Way, talking about my experience with alcoholism, addiction, and then ultimately finding my way to India and finding this wonderful tradition of Buddhism and just spirituality in general, a sense of belonging to something larger than myself. And so for that entire time, my whole feeling was that, you know what, I've made it through this. And I'm making it through this. And I want to help others to do the same because I know how awful that experience is of feeling trapped in that sense of toxic shame and that feeling of I'm no good. What am I doing in this world? I don't deserve to be here. And because I discovered myself that even though I was still struggling with my own issues, I had made a lot of progress in realizing that, you know what, I am worth something. I do have something to contribute to the world. I have a right to be here. I really felt very motivated to want to share that message with other people.
So what have you gained by working and sharing this with other people?
I gain a sense of satisfaction. I gain a sense of feeling that my life has some deeper meaning. And there's just something about serving others and helping others that, you can't really quantify the benefits. In most programs of recovery, they talk about, service to others being one of the quintessential components of any healthy recovery. And in Buddhism also, and in really any spiritual tradition, we talk about that too. Service of others, putting others before yourself, or at least on equal ground with yourself. And recognizing that everyone is deserving of love, happiness, and compassion is a recipe for your own happiness. I don't know if there's really a way to explain that other than taking the spotlight off of ourselves and our own problems and rather seeing what we can offer to others is just a natural curative for most of our emotional turmoil and malaise.
So you say you're a transpersonal hypnotherapist? What exactly is transpersonal?
Well, it's just a fancy word for the modality that I work with includes the spirit and includes this, what you might call the spirit or the soul. And so it doesn't focus simply on the personality, on sort of the gross ego. It also considers that, hey, we're larger beings. We have all those things. We have personalities. We have, our past history. We have our issues and we have our depression and we have this and that. But we also have different aspects to ourselves. We have a deeper wisdom, you could say. We have a quality of light and luminosity, primordialness that is indestructible, that is something that goes on, that's eternal. Those are kind of the aspects that I also bring into people's experience as we're going through the hypnotic process. This realization becomes very helpful when dealing with these really, really difficult issues of trauma and childhood abuse and addiction and depression and all these sorts of things. It allows for just more empowerment and deeper breakthroughs.
Ooh, cool. That sounds really nice. So what got you wanting to just go into what was the next step in becoming a hypnotherapist? How did you go about doing it?
I was recommended to go to a school actually in Seattle. There's a wonderful transpersonal hypnotherapist here who's been practicing for well over 30 years and has been training other hypnotherapists for almost that amount of time as well. And so I went through that program and got my certification and did that whole process. And I continued to do mentor relationship with that teacher. And it's great. I just keep on learning more and more every day. It's a wonderful, wonderful art form that I'm never going to become completely an expert at. It's something that can always continue to grow and expand.
So what does it look like working with you?
I like to think that I'm what I like to call my practice is a client-focused practice. So I like to really sit down with people, kind of turn off my own agenda and really try to kind of listen to where people are coming from and see where people are coming from. And through my practice of Buddhism and meditating and studying, trying my best to practice in my own humble way this path of compassion and listening to others. I try to do that. I try to bring that to my practice, to allow people to share their experience as it is and to try my best not to make any judgments, not to make any assumptions, to really open myself up to listening to where they're coming from, where they want to go, because I know that I'm never going to be able to be in their shoes. I can be as empathetic as I possibly can, and I'm still not going to know what their experience is. So I need to trust that they know exactly why they're talking to me and exactly what they need and exactly where they want to go.
How'd you come up with the name True Nature?
There is a concept in Buddhism. It's called the Buddha nature, actually. These teachings or this sort of philosophical view that we are all, in a sense, not in a sense. We are all actually just expressions of pure enlightened mind. And that is who we are at our core. And that's sometimes synonymous with what we call the true nature. That's the direction that I want to take myself. And that's the direction that I want to take my clients, is to get them in touch with, and it's a process that I'm going through as well. So we're kind of doing it together, but to get them in touch with their true nature, who they really are, cutting through all the BS and just getting down to the real basics of who we are as spiritual beings.
Do you have any fun success stories to share for your clients?
Just recently worked with a client who has been struggling with addiction. Came to me with just talking very, very non-emotionally and just kind of in this very unnerving way, almost just about, with just no emotion whatsoever, about him just wanting to overdose and thinking that that was really the only option for him. I was able to work with him over a series of sessions and really get into where he came from and where sort of that feeling of desperation and despair originated, which was back in his childhood when he was seriously neglected and abused as a kid. He was able to get in touch with that and go back and just really embrace that child that was still living inside him. And that's the thing, when we experience traumas in childhood, that part of ourselves that the child gets frozen in our personality, and we carry it with us for the rest of our lives until we can go back and give that child that healing that it needs, that love that it needs. And to be able to watch someone and watch him go through his process and embrace that child and just to start to pour tears because he was just, that he needed that love. And he realized that he could give himself that love that he didn't get then. I mean, I was crying too. I tried to keep it, keep it on the down low. Those sorts of things is why I'm so glad that I chose to do this work.
That sounds cool. What's your favorite part about being a hypnotherapist?
Watching that process unfold and just the amazement, the absolute amazement of, when I do a session with somebody, when I do sessions with myself, just, it's always amazing to watch people's own capacity for empowerment, for healing, and for change, have them realize that that's what they have. And that's what they've always had. And that's what they will always have within themselves to help themselves and to advocate for themselves. So seeing that time and time and time again, it almost comes as a surprise when I see the light turn on for people and see them realize that, oh, I can live a wonderful life, a joyful life. It's just amazing.
Awesome. So we are coming to the end of our time together, and one thing I like to ask my guests is do a 1 minute of motivation. You can imagine this as if you have a time machine and you're going back to your 8-year-old self and you want to convey everything you need to succeed in life, but unfortunately you only have a minute until you're plopped back into the future. Or you can think of it as condensing your entire life's message into a minute.
Okay, great. Before you can have a happy and fulfilling and meaningful life, you really have to believe that you deserve it. Unfortunately, for many of us, and myself included, that's not always a given. What I've discovered is that through this sort of natural, relaxed state of hypnosis, we can guide ourselves and be guided to an experience of our true nature. And that's that nature that I was talking about, that's always inherently pure, good, and worthy of happiness. The thing is that this basic goodness, it's so often covered up by feelings of that toxic shame, the guilt, and the fear. And when we believe the lies that these feelings whisper to us that we're somehow no good or unworthy in some way, it's no wonder we become trapped in these self-defeating patterns that wind up really binding us and limiting us. But what I've discovered is it doesn't have to be that way. The thing is that we can change those old patterns. We can totally release all of that shame, guilt, and fear. And as a result, we can live a life that's joyful and free. And when we realize that that's all within our power, it's, our lives are changed forever.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. I really enjoyed having you on my podcast. I loved your story on how you started living a life. You're basically living life with toxic shame and doing drugs and alcohol, and you finally decided to get sober and change your life and turn it around. Going to India was such a really interesting step. But one thing I very much enjoyed and appreciating was hearing the fact that once you started spirituality, all this personal development work, that you relapsed. And because there's always this idea that you go at it, you're finished and on the other side and there's no issues. But to show that you still were able to bounce back from that and take it into this transpersonal true nature hypnotherapy is an inspiring story. So thank you for sharing it on my podcast, and thank you for everything you do for this world.
Thank you so much, Brett. I had a really wonderful time. Thanks.
May your day be special.
You too.
And there you have it, folks. That was my interview with Chris Lemig. I always appreciate stories of people who have found their way and then lost it and then found it. I don't know. Maybe that just gives me hope as somebody who felt like he found his way and hasn't gotten it back yet. 10 years now? I don't know. I felt mostly lost during this time. Still pushing forward, still learning, just not where I want to be, so listening to somebody who got their mojo back always makes me feel good. I mean, that's the whole point of the podcast, is sharing stories that are inspiring to somebody. And this one really inspired me in that regard. I really enjoyed that. Plus, always fun listening about somebody who becomes a Buddhist monk. You don't talk to those people very often. At least I don't. I haven't talked to very many Buddhist monks. Maybe I can find one to show up on my podcast and we can Buddhist monk it up. But I appreciate that fact. I appreciate the fact that he shared. He shared who he is. And he did a really good job of talking about what he talked about, the trans nature hypnotherapy. I think I actually bought that transpersonal, or bought a book about transpersonal hypnotherapy. Never actually read it, but I bought it. It was huge. See what I mean? I took a class from someone, I believe, who teaches it, and it was pretty cool. So I highly suggest checking out Chris, even though I haven't sampled what Chris is putting out there. I think it sounds pretty cool. So Chris offers private hypnotherapy services for a wide range of issues, including addiction, anxiety, depression, trauma, and achieving your personal goals. 30-minute initial consultation and strategy sessions are always free and can be booked at his website, www.truenaturehypnotherapy.com. And you can find his book on Amazon, or better yet, or order it from your local bookstore. And there you have it, folks. That was episode 73, another year where the Dolphins won the Super Bowl. Woohoo! I am your host once again, Brett Dupree. If you like this podcast at all, leave a review. I'll love you forever. You can find me at Facebook at Increase Your Joy, and due to my bad SEO, all my LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram are Joyous Expansion. See, they all should be the same, but they're not, because I'm also at joyousexpansion.com, or episodes at pod.joyousexpansion.com. If you want to email me for any reason, you may email me at BRE2Ts, at joyousexpansion.com. I'm Brett Dupree once again, your champion of authentic joy, catalyst of transformation of the Church of Awesome, and your Joyous Expansion life coach. Wishing you to be love, to be joy, to be awesome. Now play that jingle.
joyousexpansion.com. joyousexpansion.com. Come and say hello to Brett Dupree. He is an inspirational life coach, good for you and good for me. He turned my life from grey to blue, I'm sure he'll do the same for you. Get in touch and you'll see your life will change dramatically. joyousexpansion.com. joyousexpansion.com. Yeah.